Hi guys, Mr. Bennett here. Now in today's video I'm going to be looking at sketching some curves or some polynomials, and we're going to do part 2 of 4e for you. I'm going to do the first couple as an example. So I've been given, in part A, I've been given the following equation. So in part A, I've been given the fact that we've got x equals x plus 4, x plus 1, x take 2. So the first thing I'm going to do there is I'm actually going to draw a sign diagram for that. So for my function f of x or y, I know my x-intercepts for that are going to be -4, -1, and 2. So I'm going to put those on a sign diagram. -1 and 2. Now what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to think of a number or a value that sits inside that thing. So I'm going to think of this first one, negative maybe 100. Alright, looking if it's being positive or negative. So if I was doing that, that first term is going to be negative, the next term is going to be negative, and the next term is going to be negative. So if I've got 3 negative terms, I know I'm going to have a negative value. Right, pick a value between -4 and -3. Well, -1, I'm going to think of -2. A number there. Right, if I put -2 into the equation, the first term is going to be positive. -2 plus 4 is +2. -2 plus 1 is going to be negative. And then -2 take 2 is negative. So two negatives make a positive, and a positive make a positive. Right, the next term I've got is between -1 and 2. So I'm going to think of 0, right, is the number. And so therefore +4, +1, -2. So I've got 2 positives and a negative, that's going to give me a negative. And then the next one, I'm going to think of a value greater than 2. I'm going to think of 100. Right, so then when I start looking at that, the first term is going to be 104 positive, 101 positive, and 98 positive. So all positives times together give me a positive. Okay, so if I'm now thinking of my graph itself, and this is just a sketch, I've got my graph here, my y function, my x function. I'm going to have -4. I'm going to have -1, and I'm going to have 2. So I know if it's negative, it means it's below the axis. So it's going to be going like that. It's above the axis, goes below the axis, and it goes above the axis. Right, so that's what I'm doing. Now I could easily check that on my graphics calculator. If I come to my graphing, right, I'm going to clear that. So I'm just going to put it in exactly as I see, x plus 4 bracket x plus 1 bracket x take 2 bracket. I'm going to graph that, and that's what I see. Right, so my graph matches with what I'm expecting to see with my functions there. Alright, so let's come back to the next one. We've got a couple of others that are interesting little graphs to do. Alright, so the next graph I've got there is I've got x equals -1 squared plus, so we're going to do b. So my factors there are going to be 1, and I've got a repeated 1. So it's 1, 1, and -3 and my things there. So I'm going to do my sign diagram for that, for those values. Alright, so your sign diagram gives you your graph basically. That's the key thing is with that. So I'm going to have -3 and I'm going to have 1. Alright, so think of a value that's inside these regions. So let's think -100 again is less than -3. So I'm going to put that into the equation x take 1 squared, and then x plus 3. Now the great thing is, with that term there, I could just go, well, anything squared is always going to be positive. It's going to be positive, that term. So now I have to think of, if I put negative in there, it's going to become negative. So that's actually going to be, a negative value there. Right? If I put a value between -3 and 1, I'm going to think of 0. Put 0 in there, it's going to be positive for this term. And then I think of a value greater than 1, say 10. Get my colours right. Alright, 10. Then that's last term's going to be 10 plus 3, which is positive. Positive. Okay, so therefore that gives me some idea about what's going to happen here. Alright, so if I'm just doing a little sketch here, now I know my intercept here is at -3 and I've got a value at 1. So at -3, it's actually below the axis. Alright, so it's below the axis. Then what it does, it goes above the axis and above the axis. Alright, so in other words, it's going to touch at that point. So my graph's going to curve up, it's going to come down, and then it's going to go up like that. And we know that when you have a repeated root, when you do a quadratic, it's a touching point. And so that's what actually happens there with that graph again. So now I can go to my calculator and I can have a look at my function there. So I'm just going to clear that one. Press clear. If I put that in as exactly as I see it, which is x, take 1, bracket, squared, and then bracket x plus 3, and bracket, and then I graph that, it's doing exactly what I'm seeing. So my sign diagram gives me exactly what I'm expecting to see, which is fantastic. Alright, the last one I'm going to do is part C. Part C is we've got x plus 2 cubed. Alright, so you might go, oh, that looks a bit scary. So y equals x plus 2 cubed. Well, what we've got there is we have a repeated root at -2, -2, -2. Alright, so when I do my sign diagram, that's okay. I'm just going to do the same thing for -2. I'm only going to think of 2 values. So I'm going to think of a value like -100, and I'm going to think of a value like +100. So if I had -100 in there, -100, that's -98 times -98 times -98. So when I cube that, when I have 3 negatives, that's going to give me a negative. Now, if I've got it's going to be 102 times 102 times 102, it's going to be a positive, which means it's going to be below the axis there and it's going to be above the axis over here. This graph it's got an interesting shape. It's a particular shape, which is an inflection point. So it comes up like this, and then it goes up like that, and it has arrows on it. And what we have there is what we call a horizontal inflection point. Alright, so that's a really specific graph that we're going to do. So again, I'll just show you that on a curve. Let's clear that. X plus 2, and then we're going to cube that, and then we're going to graph that. So it comes there, and it has that nice inflection point there, horizontal inflection. Interesting how you can graph these things based on just their sign diagram. Now, obviously, if you're not allowed to use your calculator, well, that's not an option, but you don't really need it because you can actually do that if you've got all your factors based on that. Now, obviously, if you've got points where it doesn't cut the x-axis, then you won't have these intercepts, and that's the next activity you have to do, which is matching the graphs with the curves that you've been given. Anyway, if you need some help, make sure you sing out. We're here to help.